Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are able to meet here this morning on this very auspicious occasion of discussing and continuing with the agenda which we started yesterday regarding the liberation of Al-Quds and freedom for the oppressed of the world. I do not want to go into a lengthy introduction about what we are going to do today, since the speakers are already here, and as mentioned by Tuan Haji Azmi, that we have a very packed program today. I would just like to introduce the speakers for this session. We have on my immediate left is Tuan Haji Mohiddeen and we have Professor Dr. Maman beside him, and we have Dr. Professor Hafizi Muhammad Noor, followed by Sheikh Yusuf Abbas, and finally on the far end is Professor Datuk Muhammad Abu Bakar. The first speaker for this session will be Professor Dr. Maman Abdurrahman. He is from Persatuan Islam Bandung and also from the Bandung Islamic University. Without much ado, I would like to call upon him to deliver his speech.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa na'udzu billahi min syururi anfusina wa sayyiati a'malina. Man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlil fala hadiya lahu. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la syarika lahu wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu la nabiyya ba'da. Wa qala Allah ta'ala fil Qur'anil Karim, a'udzu billahi minasy syaithanir rajim. Innamal mu'minuna ikhwatun faslihu baina akhawaykum wattaqullaha la'allakum turhamun. Wa qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, al-muslimu man salimal muslimuna min lisani wa yadihi wal muhajiru man hajara ma nahallahu anhu. Takallamna an al-Filistin wa tahrir Filistin kathiran ma natakallam wa hunalika mutamarat kathira jiddan والآن أيضا وهذا المؤتمر نرجو هنالك نجاح وهنالك أيضا إن شاء الله في الأشياء كثيرة لتأييد على تحرير فلسطين في المستقبل. وتكلمنا وقضية فلسطين أيضا ليست شأنا يخص بالفلسطينيين كما عرفنا، ولكن أيضا المسلمون جمعا وكذلك لمن يهتم بالأحرار ويهتم بالإنسانية في العالم، ولكن هناك أحيانا غير عادل وذلك إذا كان لمهمتهم هؤلاء يدافعون جدا ولكن لاهتمام المسلمين هؤلاء لا يهتمون كثيرا، خاصة مثلا في الأمم المتحدة كما قلنا وكما عرفنا وكما رأينا اليوم. إن قضية فلسطين تعتبر قاسما مشتركا بين كل التيارات العربية والإسلامية، فهي هم الإسلامي وحاجز وطني وارد قومي، إضافة إلى أن المشروع الصهيوني لا يرمي الاحتلال فلسطين وحدها، بل ربما في المستقبل يهدف إلى إسرائيل الكبرى التي تمتد من القرارات الاثنين ويهدد الأمة باستيعاب الخطر يطال الجميع. وهذه مشكلة كبيرة جدا خاصة في المستقبل. العلاقة بين الشعب الفلسطيني والشعوب إندونيسيا وهنالك علاقة قوية جدا، علاقة حريقة. ففلسطين من أوائل الدول التي تعرفت باستقلال إندونيسيا زمانا. في باندung سنة 1955 تحت قيادة رئيس الراحل سوكارنو ilman bi anna dual mushtaraka fi dzalikal mu'tamar qad akhadhu istiqlalaha wal Filistin. Fa'ala dual mushtaraka fi mu'tamar al-iqtisumiyah khamsa babsin wa Indonesia khasan لنصرة شعب فلسطين في الحصول على استقلالهم لا سيما على إندونيسيا أكبر دولة إسلامية. وهناك في إندونيسيا جمعيات كثيرة جدا تهتم بتحرير فلسطين، ولكن هنالك بالرغم من أكثر من الجمعيات وهناك أيضا نحن اجتمعنا كثيرا في إندونيسيا وكيف الحل من ناحية ربما مالية ومن ناحية تنظيمية ومن ناحية الأخرى التي تهتم نحن هنا في إندونيسيا. ونحن كمسلم في إندونيسيا سنهتم كثيرا بهذا البلاد الكريم. إن الواقع فلسطين والإسلام للعرب والوحي الاثنين واستكبار أن الأمريكي والتجول العالمي كل ذلك فتح الباب على مصاري للمشروع اللي يتمكن ويمضي في طريق السيطرة على المنطقة كلها اقتصاديا وثقافيا وأمنيا وسياسيا. فإندونيسيا إن شاء الله تستطيع أن تكون رائبا وقائدا في تنهيض الأمة والخروج من الاستسلام والوقوف أمام استكبار دول متكبرة الغير إسلامية ومن عاونها. لابد للجامعة الإسلامية في إندونيسيا وفي العالم الإسلامي جميعا أن تعرف الشعوب بعدوه الصهيوني مستندين إلى القرآن الكريم وما فيه من وصف منفصل لليهود وإلى السنة مطهرة ثم كتب اليهود مقدسة كالتوراة وغيرها كتاب التاريخ وكتاب المعاصرين عنه. إندونيسيا أحد البلاد التي ليست لها علاقة دبلوماسية مع إسرائيل حتى الآن. نحن جمعية إندونيسيا والمسلمون في إندونيسيا يرفضون علاقة مع إسرائيل حتى اليوم بل نرفض للزيارة هناك إلا بعض الأشياء. مثلا هناك سياسيون أحيانا يزور ولسنا ندري ماذا يتكلم معهم ونحن أيضا ننقدهم. وثانيا ربما للزيارة على القدس وهؤلاء إندونيسيا بعد العمرة مثلا وبعد يسافرون إلى فلسطين. لابد من الشعوب العربية والإسلامية أن ترفض كافة أشكال التطبيع مع صهاينة كما ترفض الاعتراف العلني والضمني بكيانهم. وبالتالي فإن علماء الأمة مطالبون بالحفاظ على هذه الجدوى ويقاوم كل سعي نحو التطبيع مع العدو وذلك بدعوى الشعوب لمقاطعة منتجاته لحرمتها ولنا الإرباح وتقوي اليهود على الإخوة الفلسطينيين والدعوة إلى وقف تعامل مع هذا الكيان دبلوماسيا وتجاريا وثقافيا ونحويا. والسؤال هو هل يمكننا أن نقطع كل المنتجات البلاد التي تميل إلى إسرائيل؟ وأنا الرجاء أيضا المقاطعة من الشجار مثلا الذين هؤلاء ينتجون تلك الشجائر، لأن الشجائر هذا يخسر المسلمين وكذلك طبعا يعاون على اليهود خاصة الشجائر الأمريكية. وكذلك فإن فلسطين من الدول المشتركة أقصد الاستدلال على علماء الأمة تذكير المسلمين بأن النصر حليف المسلمين وأن القدس ستعود بإذن الله إليهم، خاصة أنه مرت على أقصى ظروف أقصى مما يعاني الآن حيث منعت فيه صلاة الجماعة ولم يرفع أذان منذ زمان، وهذه مشكلة كبيرة خاصة للمسلمين هنا. وليس من المستحب أن يهيئ لفلسطين الآن قادة من بعض الدول العربية وكذلك والإسلامية. ولذلك نحن أرجع إلى الأحزاب السياسية والجمعيات الاجتماعية والحركات المنظمة أن تتكافئ أيديهم وقواهم الدفاع عن فلسطين. وكذلك هنالك لابد من توصية في المستقبل عن نتائج هذا المؤتمر الكبير. التوصية بكيان مثلا المقاطعة، وثالثا هنالك ربما كنت نازلة خاصة للدفاع عن الفلسطينيين المظلومين اليوم. كنت نازلة مهم جدا جدا. هل ممكن مثلا من هذا المؤتمر هنالك توزيع وعلى الإخوة الذين يختلفوا في العقائد والفقه مثلا نرجو بما قد قدمت بالأمس عن التقريب فنحن ماذا نقول السنة والجماعة نتكافئ معهم وكذلك للدفاع عن فلسطين وتحرير فلسطين. ولا يوجد هناك أيسر ولا يوجد هناك أهل ما يسمى بالشتائم خاصة إلى الصحابة رضي الله عنهم الذي قد قاد إلى ماذا تطوير المسلمين في العالم منذ بداية الإسلام حتى الآن. نحن أيضا نستمر لجهادهم ودعوتهم وتربيتهم وتنشر الإسلام والمسلمين في العالم. هذا ما أقول لكم. الله يقود بأيدينا إلى ما فيه خير للإسلام والمسلمين. وقبل أن اختتام من كلامي هذا نريد أن نقرأ الآية القرآنية من سورة الأنفال. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. وأعدوا لهم ما استطعتم من قوة ومن رباط الخيل ترهبون به عدو الله وعدوكم وآخرين من دونهم لا تعلمونهم الله يعلم وما تنفقوا من شيء في سبيل الله يوفى إليكم وأنتم لا تظلمون. صدق الله العظيم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
We thank the first speaker for his very spirited speech, which took very short time but was full of meaning, particularly about the Indonesian experience and Indonesian involvement in the issue of Palestine. For the benefit of the audience, I would like to say that each panelist has been allocated only 15 minutes to speak. So before we go to the next speaker, I would like to introduce him, Haji Mohiddeen. He's the Director of Citizens International. Citizens International is an organization that is campaigning on international issues, human rights, and other relevant to the oppressed of the world. It was established 10 years ago, and at the moment it is based in Penang. This organization is under the umbrella of the Universal Justice Network, and he will now take the floor to deliver his address. Haji Mohiddeen.
My dear sisters and brothers, my dear international guests from Iran, from Lebanon, from Indonesia and other countries. First of all, let me thank and congratulate the organizers, particularly MAPIM and the Ulama Association, who worked very hard to organize this very conference, which is coming at a very important period in the history of the anti-colonial struggle against Israel. Now, if you have looked at the news or on the internet, you would have seen that the 66th anniversary of Nabka, or the catastrophe, which happened 66 years ago, was commemorated in many parts of the world, including in Palestine itself. And the Israelis received this commemoration by killing 2 young people in the West Bank, one 15 years old and the other 17 years old, Muhammad and Nadir. And also, they demolished a workshop, they demolished a commercial shop, they demolished a house. Now this is the way the Israelis are commemorating the Nakba. This is the continuation of the Nakba. This is the continuation of the catastrophe that took place 66 years ago. But unfortunately, this news is hardly reported in this part of the world. It doesn't get headlines. It's not even reported in some of the major newspapers in Malaysia. And even if it's reported, there is hardly any response from the Muslims, who constitute 1.6 billion, over 20% of the world's population, with enormous resources. Saudi Arabia alone having a gross domestic product of more than 800 billion, whereas the Palestinian Authority only needs about less than maybe 5 billion to run the affairs in the West Bank and other parts. So there was no response to this sort of thing. And this is going on every day, going on every month, going on every year. And we are tolerating it. We are parties to it by not doing effective action to liberate Palestine from the colonization by the Zionists. So we have a certain responsibility. It's not just the people of Palestine. In fact, I salute the courage and the steadfastness of the Palestinian people. I don't think any other community would have withstood such hardship, such trials. They would have easily given up and surrendered to the Zionists. But they continue fighting generation after generation. And this we must honor, we must appreciate. But at the same time, we who are not there, who are not feeling the heat of the colonial oppression, we must do something effective. Conferences are good. I think there are 1,000 conferences going on at the moment throughout the world. But conferences must come out with outcomes that promote the liberation of Palestine. If we can contribute towards taking one step forward in this glorious struggle of liberation, I think it will be a success of this conference. So bear that in mind, the organizers. You have a great responsibility on your shoulders to ensure that this doesn't become a talk shop, it becomes a conference of action. And I think it will, under the leadership of Brother Ustaz and Brother Azmi. Well, let me now come to the subject. I'm supposed to speak about the foreign support that goes to Israel. Now we all know that, see, one of the things that we don't realize is the urgency of the problem in Palestine. You know, year after year, day after day, moment after moment, the Zionists are planning how to occupy, how to perpetuate the occupation of Palestine. And they are taking action one after another. And yet we are just watching. Now there is a project now to cleanse Baitul Muqaddis of the Arab population, to change the demographic balance in Baitul Muqaddis. Golda Meir in 1973 laid down a policy that of 22% of Palestinians, the rest, slowly they will be driven out and replaced by Jews from all over the world. Now they use this in many ways. They use their planning laws, their local council legislation to deny rights to Palestinians to build their homes. For example, they declare certain areas as green areas. They allow settlements to come up. But they don't allow a Palestinian whose house has been demolished to go and build a house on that land. So as a result, the demographic balance in Jerusalem is changing. And their intention is to slowly change it to such a level that the Palestinian population in Jerusalem will become a small minority. And therefore, where is the two-state solution? Under the two-state solution, which in my opinion has already collapsed. It has collapsed not because of anybody, but because of the Israeli itself. It's greed. It has gone on building settlements. After settlement, almost 40% of West Bank has been taken over by the Israelis with settlements. Now where is the two-state solution going to be? There is no way there's going to be a two-state solution. It has to be a one state where Muslims, Christians, Jews have lived for thousands of years in harmony until the coming of Zionism in Europe in the late 19th century. It is Zionism that created this division, created this hatred. Zionism is a racist project, a project that wants to take land, steal the land of the Palestinians and convert it into a Jewish state. And yet, the international community, the OIC, the Muslim countries, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, what are they doing? What are they doing with their resources? What are they doing with their oil wealth? What are they doing with all the armies? What are they doing with the $50 billion worth of arms they purchased from America, from Britain, and keep the arms industry going in America and Britain? What are they doing with all this? Is it helping the Ummah? Or are they supporting the Zionists by supporting America, which is the strongest supporter of the Zionists? Now this is the question we have to ask. It's time we begin to notice the elephant in the room. All this while, we have just talked in very general terms. Now we must know what is the reason for this lack of energy, lack of initiative on the part of the Muslim Ummah, which constitutes 1.6 billion, which has enormous resources, being unable not only to liberate Palestine, but to witness the cruelties, the injustice, the indignities that is being daily inflicted on the population of Palestine. Why? Why? So, I think, for me, the reason is quite simple. One is the US support and the US link between certain Islamic states, Muslim states, not Islamic states, Muslim states, who are collaborating with the Zionists, with the Americans, to just keep things like that until, while the Israelis are continuing to colonize, continuing with the colonization, continuing with the ethnic cleansing. These are the people who are collaborating. Now, we have seen recently in Egypt, there was an opportunity. There was an opportunity to strengthen the border, the resistance to Israeli colonialism, because Egypt has a border, Jordan has a border, Lebanon has a border. In Lebanon, we have seen how the Hezbollah, with the help of Iran, has been able to contain the expansion of the Zionist state. They drove away the Zionists in the 80s, and in 2006, they in reality defeated the fourth strongest army in the world. Now what about the border with Egypt? What about the border with Jordan? What are we doing? In Egypt, there was a chance. There was this overthrow of the Mubarak regime, and we were joyous. We thought, here comes the opportunity for us to do something effective, something that will lead to the liberation of Palestine. But it didn't last long. President Morsi was overthrown by a military coup, which the Americans, the Europeans, the Saudi Arabian government, the Gulf governments refused to recognize as a military coup. In fact, are supporting this military coup, because the Egyptian army, after the Camp David Accords, is no more an army that is patriotic to the Egyptian people. It has signed away its independence. It has signed away the sovereignty of Egypt. The Egyptian army, although the ordinary soldiers are good, but the military elite is now working closely in hand with the Zionists, with the Israeli army, Israeli intelligence, to protect Israel. They've never fired a bullet into Israel. They have killed thousands of people in Egypt. This very army, which is supposed to protect the sovereignty and independence of Egypt, which is supposed to help the Palestinian struggle, is killing its own people. 20,000 are in jail on framed up charges. 1,000 have been sentenced to death after a 15-minute trial. What sort of system is that? What are we doing? Why are we just sitting and witnessing these things? I think it's time we stop sleepwalking, wake up from our slumber, and really act to free Palestine. And this has to come. There has to be a change in the Arab countries. There must be the voice of the people. The $800 billion will be used to liberate Palestine, not to go and deposit it in the United States banks, not buy arms for 50, 60 billion, which you're not using it. Not for President Walid al-Talal to go and buy a jet worth 300 million and spend another 200 million trying to make it like a palace, a flying palace. I mean, this is how money, what Allah has given us is being used. So, what I'm suggesting is, I think my time is almost up. So, a few practical things. One is, I think there is no awareness about the urgency of the problem of liberating Al-Quds, Al-Aqsa. You go into any newspaper in this country, hardly anything is mentioned. There's more about actresses and footballers than anything about Palestine in our newspapers. Hardly anything. I'm given another 5 minutes, so I just want to end up there. Now, when we talk about awareness, it must be continuous. It's not just a one-year celebration or one-year congress or conference. It has to be continuous. It has to be sustained. First of all, I think a history of the Palestinian struggle must be taught to our children in the schools. It must become part of our syllabus in the schools. You ask 9 out of, maybe 10 out of 10 children in our schools, how was Israel created? I don't think 9 will be able to answer that question. Because history is not taught properly in the schools. So this is one thing that concretely we should press for. In this country, 60% are Muslims. And there are also a lot of non-Muslims who sympathize and who support the Palestinian struggle, because it's not a religious struggle, it is a liberation struggle, a struggle against colonialism, a struggle against imperialism. So there are a lot of non-Muslims in this country who would support, but they do not understand the issues. So it is our responsibility to make them aware of the issues. So we have to think of programs. This conference must come out with a committee or secretariat which sits every day and thinks how to push this struggle forward. Otherwise, I think we would have failed in what we are trying to do. Secondly, I think we should really support those who are resisting Zionist organization as well as the dictatorship in Egypt and other parts of the Muslim world. In other words, we need to fight for democracy rooted in the Islamic culture, tradition and values to come to Muslim countries. This will strengthen, this will give us the spirit of jihad. Now they are trying to kill the spirit of jihad. The word jihad is itself an ugly word for many Muslims now, Muslim elite, Muslim leaders, Muslim governments. Now we must glorify the word of jihad. the spirit of jihad must be implanted in the hearts of every child in the Muslim world. So we have to fight for the democracy based on Islamic values in Muslim countries. And thirdly, there is a campaign going on, boycott, divestment and sanctions. This was initiated by civil society organizations in Palestine, and it has had many success. If I just read 2 weeks ago that the biggest teachers union in the European Union has boycotted, has cut off relations with Israel. And companies in Norway or somewhere have withdrawn investment into companies that, and yet in Malaysia we still get goods coming through Singapore into Malaysia from Israel. Israeli ships are visiting our ports. How is that? What are we doing? Sharon, about the persimmon, you know, the fruit comes to Malaysia, named Sharon. You know, that devil who's responsible for Sabra Shatila, his name, that fruit bears his name. So I think this BDS campaign in Europe, especially in Europe, it is gathering a lot of momentum and it is worrying the Zionists. In fact, recently, Kerry, the US Foreign Secretary, he privately told somebody that if this BDS campaign gathers momentum, Israel will become like South Africa before, an apartheid state, and it will not get the support, international support it is getting now. So it is also our duty now in this part of the world and in other parts of the world to join together and do something, promote this BDS campaign. And finally, I think there is a lack of communication between us. I'm doing something here, you're doing something there, one NGO is doing something here. But there is no little communication. There's so much going on in Indonesia. From what Ustaz was saying just now, how much do we know about it in Malaysia? How do we coordinate our efforts? Why don't we have joint protests, joint commemorations? You know, there are 200 million Muslims in Indonesia. And in this region there are 300 million Muslims. Probably the biggest number. So why don't we coordinate? Even among ourselves in the region we are not coordinating. What more internationally with Lebanon, with Syria, with Iran? I think this is something that the Secretariat that is going to come out of this must give serious thought. Communication, exchange of information, common campaigning, common activities. With that, I think, inshallah, if we all wake up now and do something, inshallah, we can liberate Palestine, we can liberate Al-Quds, we can liberate Al-Aqsa. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.